Hey, yo, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. This is Smart TCG, and today I'm going to be going over my updated Paradox Rift tier list. Paradox Rift has been out for around a month now, and the format has changed quite a bit since its release. We've had multiple tournaments with this set in the format, and today we're going to be going over kind of where the format is shaping up to be heading into San Antonio Regionals, which will be happening this weekend. San Antonio is expected to be one of the biggest major tournaments in North American history, if not the largest. So we're going to be going over exactly what decks, are a good call for the tournament, what you should be, thinking of, just what decks in general are just good in the format, and I guess everything that you kind of need to know about the Paradox Rift format as it is right now, because it has been changing quite a bit. We've seen, definitely a lot of surprise decks, pop up and see some success, which will be included on this list. So we have tier S, which is just the best deck, a deck that really doesn't have very many flaws. I honestly don't even know if I'm going to put one there. There might just be one. And then we have tier 1, decks that are, very, very powerful in general. Tier 1.5, strong decks can definitely top cut tournaments, might have a couple, bad matchups. And then tier 2 will be, like decent decks. Would not be surprised if they did well, but, have a couple really rough matchups against, specific decks in the format and stuff like that. And then tier 3 are more, rogue decks, decks that I think have, more than a couple flaws, decks that, really struggle versus, specific top tier decks, but, could potentially like still do well. You really never know. So anyways, let's hop into it here. A lot of new stuff has been popping up recently. So we're going to start off with some of the, I guess, newer decks. We're going to start off here with Entei Iron Valiant. Iron Valiant Entei did get second at the most recent Latin American International Championships, and I think it deserves its spot in tier 1.5. I think it is a decent deck, has pretty solid matchups against a lot of things. If the Gardevoir player does not play cards like Jirachi, you have a pretty decent matchup against that. You're okay into decks like Miraidon and the Lost Zone engines. You're decent into Charizard as well. You kind of just have like okay matchups, versus a lot of things in the standard format as of right now. I will say with Mew rising in popularity, that is kind of the biggest issue that this deck has been running into, as the Mew matchup is pretty difficult to win. So I think that's one of the things that's, kind of holding the deck back, is that it has a really, really tough matchup against Mew. But overall, it's consistent, and I think it's, just in general, very strong. Another issue that you sometimes run into is if your opponent plays Jirachi. Jirachi prevents Medicham, which means that if your opponent is able to extend a game, even just a couple more turns, specifically decks like Gardevoir, if they play Jirachi, they can hit you with, like an Iono or two, and really kind of start to slow you down. So Entei Iron Valiant is a deck that, kind of tries to win the game on the first, 2 turns. Whereas if more people are adding in things like Jirachi, the game is starting to extend, which significantly weakens this deck. So that's, I guess, one of the only concerns with this deck, is that if more people start to add in, like Jirachi, because things like Rapid Strike Urshifu are seeing more play as well, just to stop the Medicham, then I think that this deck might take a little bit more of a hit. But as of right now, I think it's a solid deck. Moving on here, let's go and do Miraidon. I think Miraidon's tier 1. It continues to do exceptionally well. It won the Latin American International Championships, and it also has been performing really well at regionals. It got second place at Stuttgart as well this previous weekend, and I believe it won Toronto as well. Yes, it won Toronto. JW Krewall was able to win that one. So the deck just continues to perform well regardless of, what decks, are coming out. It just keeps getting stronger. Things like Iron Hands is amazing in the deck. I really think it's one of the most underrated top decks in the format. People really don't give it the respect that they give things like Gardevoir, for example, or they give Lost Zone Toolbox and stuff like that. It really is a top tier deck. It can beat pretty much anything in the format. It's relatively consistent. You have a comeback engine as well with Hand Disruption plus Path. It has really everything that you need, and I think it's a deck that's just going to continue to stay around. It's just fundamentally an incredible deck right now, and I think that it deserves, I guess, more respect. I think, because some people are just like, oh, like it's Miraidon, it's a brain dead deck and stuff like that. There's actually quite a few little minor like sequencing things, I think, that like some people don't see, and just understanding how to develop your board state and stuff like that. There actually is quite a bit of skill that I think this deck actually has, understanding resource management and stuff like that, that I think a lot of people don't necessarily see. So I think this deck is way better than people give it credit for. I think it's really, really good, and I think it's one of the top 3 decks in standard format as of right now. All right, I guess we'll go over Blocklax as of right now. I'm going to put Blocklax in tier 2. I think that Snorlax is a cool deck. It can pick up, easy wins against players that don't necessarily know how to play against it. However, if you play against a player that knows how to play against Snorlax, Snorlax is significantly weaker. For example, if you play against a Fusion Mew player, for example, that understands, how to play the matchup's actually not that great, even though you can lock Genesect if they're smart, they can get around that. If you play against a Gardevoir player that understands, how to use Toro at the right time, how to use Collapse Stadium at the right time, that matchup is not as good. Miraidon as well. A lot of these top decks actually have outs to control. It's just a lot of people don't necessarily understand how to utilize those outs. And I think as control has continued to do well, people have just naturally put more games into that matchup and have learned, kind of how to play versus it. So I think that control is still a strong deck. However, the problem is I think as more people just naturally get games in versus it, they're going to realize what they're doing wrong and they're going to start to play better, which leaves Snorlax have less margin for error or, drawing bad and stuff like that. So I think Snorlax is a decent deck, but people are getting ready for it. People know how to play against it. And also, just most importantly, people are beginning to tech for it. I mean, we're seeing, things like the Minior and the Charizard deck. We're seeing like Professor Toro and Gardevoir, even like Mew as well. So people are preparing for Snorlax due to the fact that it's been doing too well. So as of right now, I think that it's a decent deck, but it's almost kind of been doing too well for its own good. And I think that it's going to get significantly hindered by that because people know what they're doing against it. So, all right, moving on here. I'm actually going to go over Roaring Moon. I think Roaring Moon with the water energy is probably the best way to play it. I'm going to put Roaring Moon in tier, I guess we'll put it top of tier 2. I actually think this deck is not that bad. I think with the water energy, you get a little bit more versatility. You basically force your opponent to worry about something else, being the Radiant Greninja, which with the non-water variant, they don't have to worry about it. So they have to find like Manaphy, and it just adds a little bit more I guess, things that the opponent has to worry about other than just the Roaring Moon hitting them over and over again. Because the biggest issue with Roaring Moon, which is actually why Miraidon's been seeing more success, because a lot of people were comparing Miraidon and Roaring Moon together at the beginning of the format, is that people just thought that Roaring Moon was just a better and faster variant of Miraidon. However, people have begun to realize that Miraidon is a much more versatile deck that has more options and does something similar. So Roaring Moon getting a little bit more versatility in that Radiant Greninja is actually very, very important, and you can definitely catch people off guard. Typically you want to go second, and if they don't get Manaphy down on turn 1 versus a lot of decks, you can just pretty much instantly take over the game with a turn 1 Radiant Greninja. So I think that Roaring Moon as a variant that plays, 3 water energies and usually 4 energy switch is probably the best way to play it as of right now. I think the deck is decent. However, even with the Radiant Greninja, it still is just such a linear deck that doesn't really have a great comeback engine, which I think is one of the things that's been holding it back. And I think we'll continue to hold it back as well. Okay, let's go over Charizard. I think Arvanzard is tier 1. It's incredibly good. It's consistent, does what it needs to do. Really goes into every matchup with a game plan, which I think is a thing that makes it so strong right now. You really don't go into a matchup saying, I can't beat this. And I think that's something that's very valuable in the format, because there's plenty of decks right now in the standard format that, like if your opponent flips over a specific card, you just kind of know you don't really have a great game plan. For example, Entei Iron Valiant, if your opponent flips over a Mew and you don't play Spiritomb, you don't really have a great answer to that matchup. Charizard's a little bit different, where you kind of have an answer to everything. Things like Counter Catcher, Iono, just incredibly powerful combos. Pidgeot allows you to control the field, and Charizard is a deck that gets stronger as the game goes on, as its attack does more damage for every prize card that they have taken. So that's really, really good. 330 HP is just incredibly powerful as well, and I think that this is a slam dunk tier 1 deck. Moving on here, we're going to go to the Mew variants. I think DTE Mew and also Fusion Mew, I think, are both tier 1.5. I think they're very, very good decks as of right now. I actually think Fusion Mew is better than DTE Mew right now, just because I think Spiritomb is coming back a little bit. I know that Entei Iron Valiant some players have begun to put it in. I know that also Urshifu and Teleon has also, decided to add it in as well. And just a lot of decks are, kind of starting to toss in Spiritomb, which is, an issue, which I think means that the Fusion variant is a little bit better as of right now. And I actually think Fusion Mew is really underrated. Mew just in general, continues to do well, but it doesn't necessarily get the spotlight that it used to. But I think it's still, one of the more powerful decks in the standard format. You have one of the best engines, if not the best engine, that is really consistent in Fusion Strike system with Genesect V. You have the ability to hit on turn 1 as well with Meloetta, and you also have, the Judge Path engine as well, which is just really, really powerful. So the deck has pretty much everything it needs to succeed as of right now, and the Charizard matchup is admittedly not as bad as what people say it is. I think the matchup is actually quite close. If you get one turn of Path sticking, I think the matchup tightens quite a bit. And I think that the deck is quite underrated, actually. So yeah, Mew is really, really good. I think it deserves its spot in tier 1.5. I think specifically Fusion Mew is the one that I think is pretty underrated as of right now. I think it's way better than what people are giving it credit for. And I think it's pretty good. So anyways, both Mew variants 1.5 both have, good qualities about them, but I wouldn't put them in tier 1 just yet. Maybe after San Antonio that changes, but we'll kind of have to see, what that meta is looking like. So anyways, moving on, let's go to Giratina. I think Giratina is a 1.5 deck as well. I think it kind of suffers the same issue that like Entei Iron Valley is beginning to suffer in Urshifu, which is the addition of Jirachi is really, really annoying for Giratina to deal with because you can't Sableye. If decks like Charizard play Jirachi, the matchup's actually a lot closer because they can't use Sableye to set up multiple Charizards to be able to be loss impacted turn after turn. So their one way to easily one shot is just with Star Requiem. The deck when it sets up is incredibly powerful. It kind of has that high roll aspect as some other decks in the format that when you set up it's just almost impossible to beat. However, consistency has kind of always been the issue with Giratina because you're pretty much playing a lost zone deck, but you're playing a bunch of inconsistency cards because you don't have things like Forest Seal Stones and stuff like that. So you're just, naturally a more inconsistent lost zone variant, right? So, I think when the deck sets up, it's incredibly powerful. However, I think that with Jirachi's being thrown into decks and with its inconsistency problems, those really are the only things that is holding the deck back, I think, from being a tier 1 deck. But I think tier 1.5 is fair for it. I think it's really, really strong. We're gonna go through some of the rogue decks. We'll put these all down into tier 3. I think they're all fun decks. I definitely could see them, winning games once in a while, but I personally don't plan to bring them to events. But I think they're cool decks in general. So we'll also put just Iron Valley and Xatu as well down here too, just to kind of speed things up. Anyways, moving on here, I'm actually going to talk about Cloth. I think Cloth is actually a decent deck. I'm going to put Cloth in tier 2. I'm going to put it below Snorlax and Roaring Moon, but that doesn't mean the deck is bad. I actually think this deck is quite decent. Cloth actually has really good matchups against a couple of decks in the format. Specifically has a very good Miraidon matchup. Its matchup against Miraidon is incredibly strong, and it also actually has a pretty decent Charizard matchup as well because Electrode is a grass type which hits weakness on Charizard EX, which is really nice. So the deck actually hits really, really nice typings right now in the standard format. You have things like Drapion or Spiritomb as well to, try and handle the Mew matchup too. So the deck actually really can surprise people. It's been seeing some success in tournaments. It's gotten a couple day 2s. It got 17th at the Brisbane Regional Championships. Jack Underwood was able to almost make it into top 16 with the deck. So the deck actually has a lot of potential. I think it's way better than people give it credit for. The biggest thing that is holding this deck back is the Gardevoir matchup. The Gardevoir matchup is almost unwinnable if they set up because you can't one-shot the Gardevoir EX and they can Toro it. They can also snipe your B-Barrel and also Iono and remove your Capsule on the Brute Bonnet, and then you have no draw engine. There's just so many problems in that matchup. So I actually think if Gardevoir did not exist, this deck might be in tier 1.5, and I think it's actually really good. I think it's really, really strong. So Cloth is a tier 2 deck. I definitely think it's a respectable deck, and if you're considering it for upcoming tournaments, I think that's relatively reasonable. I think if you hit the right matchups, you can definitely go on a hot streak. So yeah, Cloth tier 2. It's a solid deck, and I think it's actually quite strong. I think it's quite strong in this format. As long as you don't hit Gardevoir, that's the one thing. Speaking of Gardevoir's tier 1. I think it just overall still has the best matchup spread out of the top decks in the format. It really can beat anything. The only issue with Gardevoir, I think, is time. That's one issue, and I guess there's another one too. And another thing is that you don't really have any slam dunk easy matchups except for Cloth. Every matchup is fine, but it's losable, and I think that causes people to not want to play the deck, and is an issue that I actually personally have with the deck, is that I don't go into every match saying, okay, I know what they're playing, this should be an easy time. Pretty much every matchup you can lose. For example, the Miraidon matchup you can lose if they early hand you, the Charizard matchup if you miss the one shot on the Charizard after you Mirage Step, the Mew matchup you can just get pathed out of the game. Really every matchup is losable, but the nice thing is every matchup is winnable. You pretty much always have an answer to what they throw at you, and you pretty much can, you know, kind of maneuver around and handle like whatever matchup comes your way. So I think that's a nice thing about the deck. I would say that if it's, I would say it's not a tier S deck. I don't think there's a tier S deck right now in the format. But I think if anything would get close to it, it would be Gardevoir. But I think that one thing of, I feel like every matchup is, you know, kind of losable against the top decks is the one thing that holds it back a little bit. But it's still really good. You know, it can beat pretty much anything, which is why I think it's a tier 1 deck. So anyways, moving on here, let's go over Palkia. Palkia most recently got top 4, I believe, at Gdansk. I think it's a pretty cool deck, Palkia with Ice Rider. We'll put it in tier 2. I think it's relatively solid, does decent into things like Entei, does decent into decks as well like Mew, can beat other things like Miraidon as well because you have Ice Rider Calyrex. I think it's a solid deck. You know, I think it has potential and it's not too bad. Things like Goldango we'll put at top of tier 3. They're fun decks, pretty fun when they work, but do run into some issues. Chien-Pao is interesting. I think I'll just put both Chien-Pao variants in tier 2. I think the thing that holds Chien-Pao back is just its consistency problems. And Chien-Pao's been doing abysmal recently. So I'm actually going to put Chien-Pao under Cloth. And that might be controversial, but I think that's the truth as of right now. Chien-Pao has one consistency problems, and it doesn't really convincingly beat any of the top decks except for Charizard, which you can still lose to Charizard as well. So I think its consistency holds it back, and I think that its matchup spread just overall is not great right now. Almost to the point where I think going back to just the Bax Caliber and no Iron Hands might be a little bit better. But based off its tournament results recently, it just has not been performing well. Like its conversion rate from day 1 to day 2 at major tournaments has just been awful. So I think that's, you know, one thing that's kind of concerning. And I think that the deck is really on the downtrend as of right now. Maybe we get some new cards in a new set that helps it, or maybe the format, you know, kind of adjusts to where the deck, you know, becomes a little bit better. I'm not entirely sure, but I think that it's a tier 2 deck as of right now. But yeah, definitely in the downturn. Charizard Babero, I think is just, I think it's decent. I don't think it's as good as Arvinzard with the Pidgeot. I think that it's still solid though. We'll put it at top of tier 2. The Lost Zone engine, I think of Zard is not bad either. I'll put it over actually Chien-Pao. So we'll include that here. You know, both solid decks in their own right. Just like anything with Charizard is decent. Radiant Charizard, the deck that just won the Stuttgart Regional Championships, I think is quite good. I think it's tier 1.5. I think that the only thing I think that holds it back is Jirachi is really annoying to deal with. I think that Jirachi is a big problem. And I think if Gardevoir plays Jirachi or if Charizard plays Jirachi, that matchup's not that good. So I think we'll put it in tier 1.5 as of right now. I think it's a solid deck, though, and I can definitely see as to why it won. Lost Zone Gudra, bottom tier 2. We'll just kind of start to put all these other decks in their place. So we'll put the Lugia variants. I think all Lugia variants are probably top of tier 3, along with Arceus 2. I would say the bottom of this is not necessarily entirely ordered perfectly, but we'll put those there. Urshifu and Teleant, I guess, is another one of the big top tier decks that has been getting a lot of talk. I think Urshifu is great. Urshifu has a lot of really good matchups right now. Its Gardevoir matchup is good. Its Miraidon matchup is favorable, and also Charizard as well. It is one of the few decks that takes favorable matchups into almost every tier 1 deck right now in the standard format. Which is something that is really, really nice about it. It has a pretty rough Mew matchup and has a really bad Stall matchup as well, but you trade those matchups for having decent matchups against arguably the top 3 decks. The deck has been seeing quite a bit of success, and it really is exceptionally powerful as of right now. The only issue with Urshifu that I think is holding it back is that it's incredibly matchup based, where, you know, when they flip over their Pokemon, you know if you have a chance or not. Whereas something like Gardevoir, pretty much regardless of what you're playing, you have some game plan, some way to make that matchup work. Urshifu is a little bit different, where if they, you know, flip over Snorlax, you know you don't have a great chance. If they're playing Mew, even if you play Spiritomb, the matchup is still really, really difficult. So I think that's one of the things that holds this deck back, is its matchup spread is very polarizing. It's very like up and down. It's either really good or really bad. So I think that's the only thing that holds the deck back. But I will definitely expect this deck to see success. Specifically at San Antonio, I would not be surprised if there was at least 2 in top 8. I'm surprised if I didn't see any in top 16. That's for sure. I think it's going to do very well. I think it makes a very good plays in general. We're just not going to put Roaring Moon without Water and Miraidon. I don't think those are worth mentioning. But but I would probably put like Roaring Moon in tier 3 instead. I think that you need water to be competitive. When it comes to the Valiant Jolteon and Valiant Urshifu, I actually think Valiant Urshifu is not bad. We'll put that there. We'll move this down. I think actually Urshifu is quite good. I actually put it over Chen Pao. Yeah, I think Urshifu with Valiant's decent. I just kind of prefer Entei. It's a little bit more consistent. You can attack on turn 1 as well, which is really a big thing. You know, things like Magma Basin, very, very nice. So things like Zoroark, I think, are tier 3, along with Regigigas. All decks that, you know, kind of have potential, but are just a little bit too weak as of right now. I actually think Zoroark's not a bad deck. I think Zoroark, you know, hits decent numbers against a lot of things, except it can be a little bit inconsistent at times and slow, but I definitely think it's solid. We'll go Lost Box Kyogre. This is more going to be, I guess, less the Tord variant that's been seeing success with the Roaring Moon, Iron Hands, pretty much just that box style deck. I think it's tier 1.5. I think it's a little bit clunky at times with how many different things that it plays. And if your opponent plays Jirachi, the matchup's a lot like more difficult, but I don't think the deck is bad. I definitely think it's decent. And then we'll also put Lost Box Roaring Moon as well towards the bottom of 1.52. Deck's been seeing some success, and I like definitely want to give it the respect it deserves. Turbo Lost Box just in general. These are pretty much the same thing, I guess. Lost Box Dragonite, Lost Box Greninja. I guess we'll just use this as the Turbo Lost Box, and we just won't include these. So yeah, Turbo Lost Box I think is tier 2. It's probably better, I guess, than Lost Box Treasure. I mean, they're probably pretty close. But anyways, we'll put Lost Box Dragonite, just Turbo there. But anyways, that's the tier list as of right now. Those are some of my reasons. If you have any questions, make sure to leave them in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. And best of luck to anyone, you know, attending tournaments. I will personally be at San Antonio. I'm actually recording this the day of that I leave. I'm actually leaving in a couple hours. So anyways, safe travels to everyone going. If you have any questions, you know, feel free to put them in the comments. And with that being said, this is Smart TCG, and I'll speak with you again soon. Peace out.